Good morning, everyone. We are up to in Mishna Meiser Sheni, Perek Aleph, Chapter 1, Mishna Zayin, Mishna 7. Ein loichim avadim ushvachas v'karkoyis u'behemat tamei b'demei Meiser Sheni. Continuing with the discussion about what we're allowed to purchase with the money of Meiser Sheni and what we're not. The Mishnah says you cannot buy avadim or male slaves, shvachas or female slaves, karkoyis, property, real estate, a not kosher animal, the Demei Meiser Sheni from the money of Meiser Sheni. The reason is because Meiser Sheni money, again, which is the money that you transferred the sanctity from the original Meiser Sheni produce onto this money. And another Torah says you have to spend this money on food, on something you can eat. All these things are not edible. The Behemoth Tamei is not edible because it's not kosher, and the other things are not edible objects, edible things rather. Now let's say you did. Let's say you did use the Meiser Sheni money, let's say, to buy this non-kosher animal. Then the Mishnah says, Yoichal Kenegdan, you now have to eat corresponding to what you spent. So that means like this. You misused the money of Meiser Sheni. Now that you've misused that money, we actually put a fine on you. And we say, now you need to actually go take your own money, take other monies of yours, buy food, and treat it like Meiser Sheni and eat in Yerushalayim. That is what you have to do now because of what you did by illegally spending this money the way that you did. Okay? So that's what we tell you to do. We just make sure about something here. Okay? Right. Right. You take the amount of money from your own money, right, and use it for Meiser Sheni appropriate food, right? You have to go ahead then and take the money, meaning the amount of money that you used to, let's say, buy this non-kosher animal and buy food with it and treat that food as if it was Meiser Sheni and eat in Yerushalayim. Now, there is a big question here, and that is that we learned not long ago in Mishnah 5, that in a situation where you bought water or salt, which are other also things that you cannot use Meiser Sheni money for, the Mishnah said the transaction doesn't work. You spend the money on these things, the low kind of Meiser, the Meiser doesn't acquire, which means the money that you use, that you gave, stays the same. The object that you bought isn't yours. Everything gets returned as if it's nothing. So why isn't that happening here in this Mishnah? When you're spending on the non-kosher animal or the other things, the real estate, the slaves that are mentioned, and you use Meiser Sheni money that's, not using it properly, you're not using it for the right thing, it should be that the whole purchase doesn't work and that the money is returned and everything's returned. It's like nothing happened. So the Bartanuri gives an explanation, is that it's true. That's what should happen. But what happened here was that the seller disappeared. He's gone. He disappeared with the money. There's no way of getting the money back. If he'd be around, or let's say he died and his children have the money, then they would have to give it back. But we're talking about a situation where you're stuck. You cannot get the money back. So where you cannot get the money back, being that you spent the money in the wrong way, you're now penalized that you have to now buy amount of food corresponding to the amount of money that you spent, the amount corresponding to the amount of Meiser Sheni money that you spent on this thing you weren't supposed to. You got to take that amount of money and you buy food that could be Meiser Sheni and you treat it like Meiser Sheni by eating it in Yerushalayim. Now, there's something here that is not clear to me, and I'll mention it to you, and I haven't really seen anybody directly address it. And that is that if we're saying that really the sale didn't take place, it's just that he's not around to give you back the money. So what happens with this thing that you bought? You bought the non-kosher animal. You weren't supposed to. If he'd be around, he'd be returning you the money, he'd be giving back the animal, which means that since you weren't allowed to use this money for that, you can't use it for that. The transaction doesn't take place really. So now what do you do with that animal? What do you do with that piece of real estate? It would seem like it's really not yours. So I don't know what you do with it then. It would seem to me that the transaction didn't take place from what we learned in Mishnah Hey, like kind of Meiser. The Meiser doesn't acquire. And that's the whole question here. Why aren't we saying that here? The answer is because he's gone. So because he's gone, now you do acquire it? So it's not clear. I haven't found an answer to this question. In the very least, the Mishnah would be saying, okay, maybe the transaction didn't take place, and now you're stuck with this thing that's really not yours. But at the end of the day, you misspent the money is not back, you now have to make it up. Okay? But we're going to learn the next part of it, which, again, maybe a question on what I'm saying. So one thing for sure, you spent the money in the wrong way, that amount of money you now have to make up. That amount of money, you now buy food that is Ma'aser Sheni appropriate food. You have to treat like Ma'aser Sheni in Yerushalayim. That's for sure what the Mishnah is saying. Now, another halacha about what you cannot use for your Ma'aser Sheni money. And that is, Ein Mevi'in Kinei Zavim V'Kinei Zavais V'Kinei Yoldais. You may not bring the bird offerings of a Zav, the bird offerings of a Zava, explains to you what that is. The bird offering of a woman who's given birth, chatois v'ashamais, sin offering, guilt offerings, b'demei ma'aser sheni, from the money of ma'aser sheni. So the examples here are kinei zavim. A zav is a man who has had a certain bodily emission that after a certain amount of times that he does it, he's at 3 times, that makes him into what's called a zav. He is impure. When this stops happening to him, the body stops emitting this emission. He now has to bring sacrifices to become completely pure. He was in a state of impurity, of tumah. Now, when he can get out of that state of impurity, he has to bring sacrifices. There are bird sacrifices that he brings. For some reason, the Mishnah here uses an example of bird offerings, probably because these are smaller amounts of money. But the bird offerings of a zava, or zavos, which is plural, is a female zava. And that's a woman who beyond her regular menstrual period is still seeing menstrual blood. She sees it a certain amount of time, she becomes a zava, she becomes impure, she's got to go through a process of purification. Part of that process is bringing bird offerings. Kinei Yaldis, someone who gives birth, she becomes impure. For her to become completely pure at the end of the whole process of her point of time of her purification, she also has to bring sacrifices. Now, if she can afford it, it's 1 bird and 1 lamb. Otherwise, it's 2 birds. That's kinei yoldos, the bird offerings of the women who give birth. Chatos is a sin offering. Hashem is a guilt offerings. These are sacrifices that are brought for atonement for different types of sins. The point here is that the Mishnah says you cannot buy these sacrifices with the Ma'aser Sheni money. Although we learned previously that the ideal usage of Ma'aser Sheni money is to buy an animal for a shlamim, for a peace offering, that is a peace offering, that's a voluntary offering. These are all obligatory. You cannot use Ma'aser Sheni money to fulfill an obligation. The Bartanura explains the same way you can't pay a debt with Ma'aser Sheni money, you cannot fulfill any kind of obligation. You can't fulfill any kind of debt with Ma'aser Sheni money. And therefore, you cannot use this money for any of these sacrifices. Now the Mishnah says, V'im hevi, but if you did bring Yoicha Kenegdam, so now, depending on corresponding to the amount of money that you spent on these sacrifices, that's the amount of money that you now have to use to buy food and treat that food like Sheni Nini Yerushalayim. Now, in this case, the Mishnah says in Hevi, if you brought. It doesn't say if you bought, it says if you brought. Brought means you actually brought the sacrifices. So it would seem here that when it comes to this halacha, this part of the Mishnah, that's saying you can't use the Ma'aser Sheni money for obligatory sacrifices, it would seem like it would work, which we've had examples of that. That even though you weren't supposed to use the Ma'aser Sheni money for that, it would work here. Nonetheless, and it would work. So if it does work, now it says imhevi, if he brought. It would seem like, if you spent the money on it, that it would somehow or another, it seems like the money would revert back, meaning if you spent the money on these things and it was caught, the money would come back to you, the animal would go back to its owner, and nothing would change about it. But then it says, but if you did bring, so it's not clear to me what's happening here when it comes to these transactions. Again, if it's a good transaction, What is v'im haven if he brought? If the transaction works, is there some kind of law not after it works not to use the animal? But if you did, I don't know. It's not clear to me. I don't know what the answer is. It sounds like from the Mishna that, again, you weren't supposed to spend the money, and if you weren't supposed to spend the money, then the money should go back to you, and the animal go back to the person you bought it from. But then it says, Vim haven, but if you brought. So what's going on there? Did it work? Didn't it work? Even if it doesn't work, you can still bring the animal? Is it same case as before, that because you didn't, the guy's not around anymore, so now it is yours? I'm not sure how it works here. I apologize. Okay, but that's what the Mishnah is saying. You're not supposed to use it for these obligatory sacrifices. If you did and you brought the sacrifice, then now you have to buy food corresponding to the amount of money that you spent on these sacrifices and treat that for the Ma'aser Sheni in Yerushalayim. Za'aklal, this is the rule. Kol shehu chutz la'achil v'shtil l'sicha d'mei Ma'aser Sheni yoichal kenegdai. Anything that is outside of eating, drinking, or rubbing onto your skin, and that was anything, and that's what you use Ma'aser Sheni money for. You use Ma'aser Sheni for other than these three things. Yoichal kenegda, you now must eat food equal to the amount of money, of the amount of Ma'aser Sheni money that you used inappropriately. The Mishnah here just added something that we didn't necessarily know before. And that is, we knew about eating, we knew about drinking. You can use the Ma'aser Sheni money to buy food and drink. The Mishnah now tells us you could also use the Ma'aser Sheni money to, let's say, buy oil to smear on your body. That's appropriate also for Ma'aser Sheni money use. It's only when it's outside of that, like the examples brought in the Mishnah before. This is where we say, Yoicha Kenegdai, that by misusing this money, you now have to make up for it by taking that amount of money, buying food, and treating that for like Ma'aser Sheni. Okay. So the Chavetz Chaim is now in Klal Bey's Mishnah Test. We're up to chapter 2, Mishnah Halacha 9. And again, continuing with the situation where the Lashon Harah was said in front of three people, where we are now working with the opinion that says that one of those three is now allowed to repeat what was said, because since it's going to get spread and become well known, Lashon Harah doesn't include that. Our entire discussion is regarding saying over what you heard. But to add something to what was said, that there's no permission to do. Or to make what is being, now when you're telling over to the next person, now you kind of add more flavor to it. You make sure that he's going to get a sense of what this is. To say, he says, what I'm going to tell you about Shimon, that's the truth. That is it. This is, on the dot. This is exactly what should be believed. What was said. You're not adding to the information, but you're trying to add more credibility to it. No question that's forbidden to do. Because now with your addition, you now degrade him, defame him. There would have been a certain degree that we can say that what would become known by the fact that it was said in front of three, okay, that which would have become known anyway is not Lashon Harah. But now that you make additions to it, that means now there's more. You're now putting more to than what would have become known just by spreading through three. And therefore, it's forbidden to do. Another addition is that, as we're going to say, there's something about, you could hear the Lashon Harah. In this case, maybe you could even say it over, but you can't in your heart believe it as the absolute truth. And therefore, if you now start making additions to it, that shows that you really accept this as the truth. One has to be very careful. If, let's say, it becomes well known about a person who, when he was younger, did not conduct himself properly. But he's changed, and now he conducts himself perfectly fine. Or let's say it's well known that his parents, his fathers, his parents, his family did not conduct themselves properly. But he doesn't follow their ways. Anything similar where it's something that can be be degrading if it gets out, people know about it, but it's not like the guy did anything wrong. It's forbidden for you to degrade your friend, to degrade this person in front of other people, meaning to say, oh, you know what he used to do? And a person who says this, who says this in front of others, even if it's not in front of the person himself that you're talking about, and you're doing it to put him down, even if you don't add anything to it, you're now part of the group of people who speak Lashon Harah, that we say will not receive the face divine presence in the world to come. Because the whole permission that Apei Tlasa affords wouldn't apply here. Even though everybody knows about it, being that there's nothing on his part that he's doing wrong, therefore there's no purpose to be able to say it. The prophet says, the son shall not carry the sin of the father. All his iniquities that he did shall not be remembered anymore. And now you make him a laughing stock in the eyes of other people. Meaning, although we say that when it comes to Lashon Harah, if something is well known, it's not Lashon Harah if you say it. The Chavetz Chaim is saying it only makes sense to say that can only be applied, rather, if it's something about that he did something wrong. He did something wrong. And it's going to get out that he did something wrong. And he did that wrong thing, or he may have done that wrong thing. That already is where we say, okay, something that becomes well known is something that doesn't fall into saying Lashon Harah. However, if at the end of the day, what is known and being said has nothing, it involves nothing wrong on a person's part. He used to conduct himself that way, but he stopped that. And everybody knows he stopped it. Or his family acted a certain way, and he doesn't do that. So at the end of the day, there is no guilt on his part. There's nothing he's guilty of here. Absolutely nothing. And now you want to go ahead and repeat it to people and say it to people and bring it up again in order to put him down, then that's Lashon Harah. Chavetz Chaim seems to be saying that this whole idea of something well-known being said is only if that thing is actually a wrongdoing on this person's part, and he's wrong for doing it. But if at the end of the day, it's not anything wrong on his part whatsoever, but now said to put him down anyway, then this permission of the fact that it's well known doesn't apply. Have a wonderful day.